Well, I'm dressed a little differently today than I was the last month. It's all thematic. Don't worry, it'll all come into play. I don't normally dress like this. I do expect everybody else to be wearing suit and tie. Next week, though, we'll see how that goes, yeah. Yeah, exactly, competition. We'll have a best and worst dress list. Be like oh, no. Yeah, exactly. I want to start today with a question. And I want to have this question kind of in the back of our minds the whole time I'm speaking. It's a simple enough question, but I think it has fantastically powerful ramifications for our life. What's the difference between being a cultural Christian and being a disciple? What's the difference between being a cultural Christian and being a disciple? I believe Jesus spoke a lot about it. He used different words, and he used different words throughout the Bible. I've kind of taken a lot of what he was talking about. I made up the label cultural Christian. I've seen it used before. I didn't invent it. But what brings you to the next level? What brings you from somebody who has beliefs in God to somebody who can be used by God? What makes you more spiritually mature, and what makes you spiritually more comfortable? Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable with being comfortable? When you read the New Testament and you see the way Jesus lived and his disciples lived and the radical transformations in your life, do you look at comfortable and think something's missing? Something's wrong? If you sat across from Jesus, I ask myself this question sometimes, and it's shocking to me every time. If you sat across from Jesus and he began asking you questions the way he always asked everybody questions, would you press in or would you be looking for the way out? If you actually imagine yourself sitting across from Jesus Christ and he started telling one of his famous stories, would you be taking notes or would you be looking for the nearest exit? If I really answer that question honestly, it definitely changes the way I live. So I'm going to define a cultural Christian for you today. My definition for this morning is going to be something like this. Somebody who believes in God, but looks like someone from the culture in general. Inside, they're a Christian, but outside, they look a lot like everybody else. If you ask them something along the lines of, how is your Christian walk? They'd say something like, I believe Jesus Christ is the risen Lord and Savior. But if you asked them, how is your Christian walk? Well, they wouldn't have a whole lot to say. They don't look any different. You might ask, why does that matter? Why would it matter how you look? John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Belief, that's the important thing. That's the crux of salvation, is that belief. And I'm not denying that. But here's the point I'm trying to make, and here's the point I hope to explain this Sunday morning. Belief follows action. I don't think it's possible, I know it's not possible in my life, and I don't think it's possible in general to hold beliefs while acting differently. I don't think it's possible. You might be saying, well, but I'm pretty good. I go to church. I have the right beliefs. And that's pretty good for now. I think that's enough. And maybe. But you see, Joan mentioned that university is coming up for some kids. For some, it's going off to high school. Or there's teachers, I know. There's a few teachers in the church. And they're going to be going off to teach in high school. And there's a lot of change and flux that happens around September. And although this principle that belief follows action is true all the time, I believe it's specifically true and can have catastrophic results in these big shifts, these moments of big shifts in our life. I went to university quite a few years ago now, I guess, and throughout my kind of 3 years there, I met lots of people, lots of Christians. And I'm sad to say, I saw a lot of Christian faiths spontaneously combust. Catastrophic failure in Christian faith. And I've thought a lot about it. I remember one girl, she came to university my second year of university, and I was part of the Navigators, which is a Christian group on campus. And she showed up at the first. She had grown up in a conservative Christian family, living in a conservative Christian community. She had gone to the customary conservative Christian Bible school for 1 year before university. She was well prepared. She had all the right knowledge, and she professed all the right belief. But within the first few weeks of her life at university, I wasn't the only one who noticed that you couldn't tell by the way she lived what her beliefs were. But she still professed the same beliefs, and I believe she still believed the same beliefs. But I couldn't see it in how she acted. And I couldn't see it how she acted, and I couldn't see it how she acted, and that foundation was getting worn and worn and worn and worn, and it just collapsed on her. It took less than 6 months before she was facing a minor drug possession charge. She dropped out of school. She was pregnant. She didn't know who the father was, and she wasn't on speaking terms with her parents. Less than 6 months. She had, I don't know exactly if she was 19 or 20 or whatever, but she had almost 20 years of solid belief. But, by her own admission to me, I'm not trying to judge her. This is what she told me. She said, the thing is, I've never actually had to really do anything. It's all been kind of done for me. I just have to go to church and go to Bible school and whatever. And so she said, I'm looking forward to the challenge of university. But she didn't rise to the challenge. Now, that's a catastrophic, that's like a monumental, just spontaneous failure. And it doesn't normally happen like that in our lives, I don't think. It happens slowly and subtly and slowly and subtly. But I'd like to propose a principle today that things destroy by default. By default, your foundation gets worn away. By default, disbelief creeps in. If we don't do anything, by default, we disbelieve. If you don't wake up in the morning and decide, the theme of this message is, how do you dress? Do you dress by default or by design? By default or decision? Do you choose how you want to live? The cultural Christian can usually be spotted because they begin to ask questions like, is it really a sin? What if I do this but not that? Well, that should be fine. One question you might hear them ask. What if I go to the party but I don't partake? I didn't really know what was going to be happening there when I went there, and then it just kind of all got caught. It wasn't really so bad, was it? It's this kind of justification. Or, even more subtly, you see cultural Christians, and you can spot them from a mile away because they don't ask any questions. They just kind of go, they'll say things like, well, that was all true and fine back then. Is that really relevant today? That was a cultural thing. They behaved that way as a cultural thing back then. Today, it's not the same thing. Whereas disciples are always using the Bible like a mirror. When they read that, they ask, how does that apply to me? How can I take that? What can I do? A disciple is always looking at their beliefs and saying, how does this inform what I'm going to do? They're deliberate. They decide what they will do. A cultural Christian does it by default. And they can look a lot like a regular Christian. But the foundation's not there. Now, I know there's a bunch of people from this church, in the surrounding community, who are going off to Bible school and university and high school and a bunch of shifts. These are real questions. Are you actually willing to do it? Jesus wasn't blind to this issue either. He dealt with this issue actually quite a bit. There's one specific story I want to look at. It comes from Matthew 22. The parable he told us, it goes like this. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables. This is Pharisees and sinners and tax collectors all kind of gathered around him, as you often found with Jesus. And he spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Jesus was always given these wedding feast parables and wedding parables. It was about the reuniting of God to man, of that relationship being restored, of either Jesus to the individual or God to the community. So here we are again, with a wedding feast analogy. And so the king sends his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Now here he's talking about the Jews, God's chosen people, right? He had hammered them and built into them a sense of who he was, and they were supposed to be the ones who would lead the world to God. But they were rejecting him. They were rejecting him actively at the time. So they would not come. And again, he sent other servants, saying, "Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fat calves have been slaughtered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast." But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business. It's kind of blended in. While the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops, and he destroyed those murderers and burnt their city. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find." Just throw open the doors, everyone. This is awesome. This is where we can get excited. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. Now at this point in time, there's a lot of theology you could get out of here, a lot of garbage theology you could draw out of here if you want to stop right here. Everyone, bad and good, just come on in. It's easy, it's simple, just show up. That's all you got to do, just show up. But Jesus has this habit of keeping on talking sometimes. So he goes on to say, "But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment." Now, this is an odd statement, but I just feel like I need to clarify something. Nowadays, when you're at a wedding, it's customary, and it changes from wedding to wedding, but it's customary that the bride and the groom or the bride and the groom's family provide dresses for the women in the wedding party, or suits or tuxes for the men in a wedding party. I was one of the best men in a wedding maybe a month ago, and they provided a whole bunch of stuff for me. I just showed up, and they provided it for me. My only requirement was to put it on. That was my only requirement. It was similar in those times, but they provided wedding garments for everybody. Usually white robes for everyone, so that everyone would be clean, everyone would have new garments, and that was how the parties went. That was customary at the time. So they would have gotten this, they would have understood that there's a man with no wedding garment. He would have been offered a wedding garment and not put it on. But he's in the feast. So the king says to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And the man was speechless. Then the king said to his attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And here we are. "For many are called, but few are chosen." Many are called, but few are chosen. Now, somewhat this is a statement of who God is, of his sovereignty, of his holiness, of his requirement that you accept his salvation. But at least somewhat, this is just a good warning. This is a good warning. Jesus is aware of these natural principles with supernatural consequences, and so he's warning us. He's basically saying, if you won't put on the garment, if you won't identify yourself as one of the wedding guests, if you won't do your part to actually dress into the kingdom of God, no amount of belief will be enough, because it's going to corrode your belief. It's going to corrode your belief. It's going to corrode your belief. You can't let the cultural standards determine how you act by default and hope to have beliefs that are incredibly countercultural. It's not consistent. That inconsistency is going to create tension in your life, and tension in your life, and tension in your life, and it's going to resolve. It's going to resolve one way or the other. But more often than not, you default to disbelief. Like a building that's left alone, or a marriage that's never worked on. A life not built on decision defaults to disbelief. The man wasn't willing to identify with the other guests. See, the Pharisees, they were rationally rejecting Jesus. They were choosing a different path. And he debated with them, and he would argue with them and discuss with them, but they were engaging him still. And actually, some of the Pharisees, they actually came around to his viewpoint through that discussion. There's a couple of examples given throughout the New Testament of people who were Pharisees or teachers of the law who actually were able to because they were at least rationally engaged in the issue. They were willing to live the way they taught. They were just teaching bad theology. But this guy, he just shows up and he wants all of the good but none of the work. He wants all of the feast. He wants the community of believers. He wants people to be saying, oh man, I'm praying for you. Oh, because that feels good. Oh, you're praying for me? That's nice. But Monday to Saturday, this guy doesn't want to live any differently. He's not willing to identify with Jesus. In Matthew 10:32, this is just a few chapters earlier, Jesus says this, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. You notice the word that's just glaringly absent there? Belief. Jesus doesn't say, so whoever has good beliefs in their heart. Man, I'm going to pour out blessings and favor on them. He says, acknowledges me. There's an action condition that we can't get around. And the church as a whole, the North American church, we're guilty of preaching a belief-centered faith. Just show up and have some beliefs. It's easy. And we make this, the entry requirement is easy, but the living requirement is hard. It's a burden. I'm not going to lie. It's really hard. That's why we're preaching small groups. That's why we're preaching community. That's why we're talking about 40 days of community. We have October 4th, we have the men's retreat coming up. That's why we get together as men, and the women get together as women, and we sharpen each other. Because it's hard. But beliefs are easy. Beliefs are very easy. Everything defaults to destruction. Now, you probably have never actually met a man who ever sat there and said, God or the devil? God or the devil? Who am I going to worship? Well, I mean, God's pretty holy, but man, the devil's pretty enticing. You know, I think I'm going to worship the devil. I've never met a human being who ever has just chosen in a rational discussion to worship the devil. I'm not saying it's never happened. I'm saying that's not how it normally happens, and I've never met somebody like that. I have quite a number of friends who are atheists, who are really rabid atheists. They're aggressive atheists. You don't have to go long in a philosophy class in university to meet some really punchy atheist guys. And I've talked to a few of them, and I've asked them, because some of them are former Christians. And I asked them, how did you get from there to there? What was that moment? What was that deciding factor? And they'll all tell you, that's a rational decision. I chose not to believe because I found the beliefs, too crazy or too weird. But I pushed them. Okay, well, talk me through that moment. Talk me through that moment. 100% of the time, this is the answer I have gotten so far. Well, I can't really pinpoint a moment where I really decided. Just over several months or several years, it just kind of seemed less and less real. Less and less real. And then I kind of realized I was already living without God, and I was getting along just fine. And then I thought, well, if God was really a real God, then this wouldn't have been happening. I wouldn't be living just fine all by myself here. And it just kind of seemed weird to introduce God again to my life. It just kind of drifted over time. I got deadened to what I believed before, and now here I am. And then from there, they've chosen a path, right? And they've gone down that path, and things have changed for them. But it didn't start that way. I'm not saying it never starts that way, but it didn't start that way for them. It just, over months and years, they just kind of defaulted. It kind of defaulted. That's what happens. Is this preventable? Is this default to destruction? Is this lack of a decision on how we plan on dressing in the morning, to put on the salvation of Christ that He offers us freely or not? Is this preventable, or are we just kind of stuck in this vague confusion, worrying about what happens? It's totally preventable. It's not easily preventable. I'm not going to lie and say it's easy. It requires every morning waking up and saying, no, I'm going to press into this. This is hard. In fact, this situation I'm in, this is going to be harder or more uncomfortable. That bachelor party that I was invited to, that I know is just a drunken debauchery where there's just going to be strippers, and I'm going to not go, and they're going to ask me why, and I'm going to have to tell them, and that's going to be awkward. Or that guy that I work with who's really going through this hard time, and I can just feel that God's saying, you need to pray for him. Well, I'm going to have to ask him if I can pray for him. And he's going to ask, what do you mean? And then I'm going to have to say, well, because I'm a Christian. And it's going to get uncomfortable. It's going to get uncomfortable. It's hard to dress like you believe day in, day out. Now, I'm a pastor now, so it should be easy for me, right? I mean, I stand up here publicly and I talk about Christianity like every other Sunday. Yeah, but I'm not talking about Sunday, because you're all here every other Sunday, or every Sunday. I'm talking about Sunday afternoon to Saturday night, living it day in, day out. And I'm not going to kid you, that's hard. That's hard. That's why Jesus says, many are called, but few are chosen. Because it's easy to have right beliefs. It's so hard to live into it. That's why we need this community around us. In John 13:35, Jesus says this. This is from the mouth of Jesus. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Not about your beliefs. Beliefs are internal. Now, I'm not trying to discount belief. I've been kind of coming off hard on belief here, I think. Belief is crucial. Belief is absolutely crucial, but it's inside, and nobody knows what your beliefs are. It's easy to be a Christian and have all sorts of beliefs. It's easy to be a Christian and use some verse to justify hating someone. I see it all the time. It's easy to be a Christian and justify using a verse racist attitude or sexual immorality of one kind or another. Using some verse, taken out of context, twisted, this is maybe grown a little bit, this is maybe put down a little bit. It's hard to live day in, day out, because you end up having to take the whole Scripture and the whole life of Christ and holding it up as a mirror to yourself in the morning and saying, how does this apply to me? And if I truly believe this, how would I live? It's a question I try to ask myself frequently. And it's the question I want to challenge you with and leave you with today. If I truly believe this, how would I live? And I hope you're all doing some sort of devotion or daily reading. Or not. If not, that's your challenge for this week. Just pick up your Bible, start somewhere and start reading. Or pick up a devotional or just engage with the Word. But assuming you are, before you're done, I don't care if this is like daily bread, 5 minutes in the morning, something simple. It's not about the complexity or the big 2 hours of prayer. Just whatever you're doing, before you're done, I want to encourage you to ask this question. If I truly believed what I just read or what I just prayed, how would I live differently today? And then start. And it's simple, but it's hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard. It doesn't need to be complex. I mean, it's literally, it's as simple as showing up to the feast and putting on the garments. But that means day in, day out, actually changing the way we lived, becoming a more loving community, serving one another, forgiving one another, encouraging one another. And not just these one another's, because that can be really easy sometimes. I mean, the one another's from that other denomination that you really disagree with, for instance. Or that boss who's just terrible. Just terrible. Can you forgive him every day? I was talking to somebody, in fact, just before church here, and we were talking about this boss I had who was just so condescending to everybody. He was so mean. He was so demeaning. And every day I had to forgive him, and every day I knew the next day he would do the exact same thing. Can I do it? Can I actually live differently? Can I live so differently that the employees around me come to me and ask me, how do you put up with that so graciously? Now, I'm not trying to say this as a paragon of virtue. Sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. It was hard. It was really hard. But that's what we have to press into. That's what we have to press into. And if you're not there, if you know in your heart that you have beliefs but you don't have actions, or you have strong beliefs and you have weak actions, if you know in your heart you're being challenged that way, I pray right now, I just pray, you don't go another day without committing to change your beliefs, without committing to change your actions to match your beliefs. I would rather have somebody come to me and say, I'm actually really wrestling with what I believe, than have somebody come to me and tell me, I know exactly what I believe, but then I look at their life and see nothing. It's so hard to engage that because you say, you encourage them. Well, hey, maybe if you would do this, oh yeah, I know, I believe that works. And then what? And then what? And they think they're trying out the gospel. Maybe you think you're trying out the gospel and it's not working, but you're not actually trying it, you're trying it internally. And you're not really feeling the blessings. And Jesus says, if you acknowledge me before men, I'll acknowledge you before Father. And his mercies will pour down on you. And his forgiveness will pour down on you. And his healing will pour down on you. And his Spirit will pour down on you. But it starts with acknowledging before men what you truly believe. I'm going to invite the prayer team to come up here. Because I know there are people here who are scared to try. Who know that their beliefs and their actions don't match. That they've grown a distance between them. And I know there's people who are not sure what the next step is. I mean, I know I laid it out simply, right? You do your devotional and you just ask, how would I live? But we all know it's going to be more complicated than that. It's going to be harder than that. Come Tuesday, come Wednesday, it's going to be easy to forget. And so I want to encourage you, if you're there and you're wrestling and you know you're going to wrestle this week, to come up for prayer. It's so hugely powerful when you come up and somebody prays over you and says, I'm going to be praying for you this whole week. And you know there's some accountability. And you've told someone else already. You've already acknowledged. These are men, women, you can acknowledge God before, right here, in a safe environment. You can start here. It doesn't have to start with that rabid, violent atheist who's just going to cut you down and you want to. It can start here. It's simple. It's simple. Sometimes we make it so complicated when it can be really simple. Just start today. Just come up. Come up for prayer. Just ask them, can you pray for me? Can you encourage me? And can you ask me next Sunday how it's going? It's as simple as that. Turn it over to you.